From Minnesota Public Radio and American Public Radio, this is Presidential Choices, a series about issues and leadership in the '92 campaign. Major funding for Presidential Choices is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the John and Mary R. Markle Foundation.
He would put America's wealth and power at the service of some vague new world order. We will put America first.
We won the Gulf War in 44 days. Surely Congress can pass my urgent domestic program in 52 days.
And I know what it's like to feel betrayed. And I believe I could go to the American people and bring the best out of them. And get them off their backs again and get them to work again.
The Cold War is over. Japan won.
Today, after the Cold War, national security and the Democrats' New World Order on Presidential Choices.
My name is Jim Fallows, and I've been reporting about America's dealings with the outside world, from here in the U.S. and over there. We've heard in the last year that we're at a turning point, and that it's time to make the big choice. Either we continue to lead and be involved as the one surviving superpower, or we look inward for a while, licking our wounds and letting the foreigners fend for themselves. The choice would seem to be central to this election. President Bush, like several presidents before him, has issued theoretically unlimited commitments to step in at any point on the globe. During the fighting in Iraq, Bush became, in effect, the president of the world. And last month, in his State of the Union address, he said that he and his nation must keep on leading the fight for freedom everywhere.
Not out of arrogance, not out of altruism, but for the safety and security of our children.
But from Pat Buchanan on the right and various Democrats on the left comes the reply that everywhere is too big a place. Buchanan, the one true phrasemaker in the race, has made opposition to Bush's internationalism the basic theme of his campaign.
He believes in some Pax Universalis. We believe in the old republic. He would put America's wealth and power at the service of some vague new world order. We will put America first.
The choice between isolation and engagement might be complicated enough if we really had that choice. For better or worse, we don't. Commercially, technologically, culturally, we are in the world as never before. Moreover, both impulses, wanting to leave a mark among nations, but also wanting to pull away when we're tired or bored, are deeply part of our history, our national makeup, and our politics. People came to this new world to run away from the old. But even as they fled, they looked back. 19th century America enjoyed the shelter of broad oceans and high tariff walls, but it flooded China with missionaries, sent troops on expeditions, told the Japan of the shoguns that it had to open up. Woodrow Wilson tried to write a new code of law for all nations. Until the end of World War II, Americans believed they had the right to venture out this way, but also the right to come home and be left alone when that suited them. In 1945, the United States gave up that right of disengagement for fear that Soviet power would fill any vacuum the U.S. left. But America still had two great assets, two cushions against strain and inconvenience, that let it conduct this engagement on generally American terms. One was wealth. America could support its friends and bear extra costs without feeling the pinch. The other asset was the wide, deep certainty that we stood for something, and that time and right were on our side. Americans of the early Cold War may have worried about the bomb, but they took it for granted that American armies could subdue all enemies, and that American verve and idealism would win friends. This was magnificence and it was hubris, all in one. Paul Tsongas was in Ethiopia with the Peace Corps, Bob Kerrey was in Vietnam, both because of the sweeping, self-confident promises made in the John Kennedy days.
We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
The choice in this election is not between extremes of globalism or isolation, no matter what Pat Buchanan says. It is instead about the balance and terms of our engagement. Whether we can use assets like wealth and national purpose to defend our interests in an inevitably international age. And the main disagreement in the campaign is about the state of those national assets. The Democrats, in different ways, all say that the national patrimony has been run down. President Bush says it's been restored.
Moods come and go, but greatness endures. Ours does.
Well, tell it to the British, I am tempted to say, or to mighty King Philip of Spain, or to the Ming emperors of China. All of them thought that their wealth and confidence were everlasting, and all of them were wrong. They couldn't adjust, and while they kept dealing with the world, it was no longer on their own terms. Can we adjust? On what terms will we deal? We'll listen for what our candidates say.
James Fallows is the Washington editor of The Atlantic magazine and an NPR Morning Edition commentator.
This is Presidential Choices, and I'm your host, Charles Ogletree. Today we're broadcasting live from the State of Iowa Historical Building in Des Moines. For those of you new to Presidential Choices, I'm on the campaign trail assuming the role of a hypothetical Democratic candidate for president, discussing public policy issues with a team of advisors. Next month, we'll approach public policy making from the perspective of a Republican incumbent president. Thanks to all of you for joining me today. Our topic is After the Cold War, National Security and the Democrats' New World Order. We'll have about 50 minutes of discussion today, and then we'll invite our questions and comments from our listening audience and from those of you here at the State of Iowa Historical Building.
Charles Ogletree is a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination. He's on a jet in between stops on the campaign trail. Ogletree is a two-term governor from a Midwestern state who didn't have to vote on the use of force in the Persian Gulf. He was, however, a strong supporter of both Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. He's a Vietnam War veteran who distinguished himself in combat in the war. Although he has traveled widely and has a strong interest in foreign affairs, he's aware that he might not strike voters as experienced and competent enough to win their trust. He's gathered some of his advisors to solidify his foreign policy positions. His advisors are Congressman Dave McCurdy of Oklahoma. Representative McCurdy is chairman of the House Select Committee on Intelligence. Last year he considered but decided against running for president. Christopher Matthews, a syndicated columnist, Washington bureau chief for the San Francisco Examiner, and former Carter speechwriter. Mr. Matthews was also the top aide to former House Speaker Thomas Tip O'Neill. Madeleine Albright, president of the Center for National Policy, a nonpartisan public policy research organization. Ms. Albright was a foreign policy advisor in the Dukakis and Mondale campaigns. New York Times columnist Leslie Gelb. Mr. Gelb was Assistant Secretary of State from 1977 to 1979. And now, candidate Ogletree.
For joining me today. I told you I want to talk today about foreign policy. You know my background. You know I'm a war veteran. You know as a Democrat, I'm rather hawkish compared to some of the other candidates in the race. I want you to help me with my defining moment in talking about foreign policy. When I was a young man, I remember hearing President Kennedy give his great speech about this country bearing any burden, that we'll pay any price. And it reminds me of the fact that a good, strong Democrat could have a strong foreign policy position and could be effective in foreign policy. I want to, for a moment, play President Kennedy's speech one more time, and I want you to advise me whether or not this is the kind of approach I, as a Democratic candidate, should be taking in 1992. Let's hear the President's comments.
Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
Congressman McCurdy, that reminds me of exactly what we should be focusing on right now, and yet people seem to think that foreign policy should take a backseat to economic issues. Why isn't the Democrats out front on foreign policy?
Well, I think
they've been gun shy. I think we've been burned over a number of times in the past, and feel that the president, both Reagan and Bush, have been able to get tremendous American support behind demonstrations and use of force. I think we as Democrats shouldn't concede or just automatically let the Republicans run on the issue of foreign policy. We have a foreign policy. We can develop a foreign policy. And as you said, you have a record that you can be proud of. The call today it should not be one of letting them pin us down as being the isolationist party, because that's not what we stand for. The heritage of the Democratic Party, whether it's Roosevelt or Kennedy or Truman, even Carter on human rights, has been to protect not only our own national interest, but also those values that this country represents. We ought to be talking about values. It shouldn't be this real politic of the Henry Kissinger days, or supporting this dictator just because they happen to be friendly with us. We have a new era. This is a historic opportunity in the world, and the world looks to us for leadership, whether we like it or not. We have that responsibility because we're the only superpower left. And it's fitting, as an African American yourself, Governor Charles, I was recently in South Africa, and a young black man came up to me and he said, "Congressman, now that the United States has conquered the world, what is it you want?" And I said, "We haven't conquered the world. We don't desire territory. We don't want empire. We do want stability. We want Americans and other nationalities to have the same rights that we have. And we'd like to have free, open trade so we as a community of nations can lift the opportunity for everyone in this world."
Well, I agree with those principles, but Mr. Gelb, let me ask you this. I mean, isn't it the sense of the public that the Democrats have effectively capitulated on the issue of foreign affairs, that there's no one who's articulated a strong and clear message that's distinguishable from the president?
There's no doubt in my mind that the public perception of the Democrats on foreign policy is that they still prefer the Republicans, because they don't have a clear sense of where Democrats stand. But I suspect that Democrats are more united on foreign policy today than ever before, largely because the Cold War is over, and that was the principal dividing line, because the Democrats had conservatives and liberals on Cold War issues, and now they're gone. I think foreign policy should be an important part of this campaign, but it can't be the old foreign policy. Bush has that locked up.
What's the new foreign policy?
The new foreign policy is what I would call the new agenda in world politics, where the dividing lines between foreign affairs and domestic affairs have pretty much blurred, where you deal with issues like energy, environment, health, economic well-being, all of which have a mixture of foreign and domestic components.
But is that really a foreign policy, Leslie? It sounds like it's an economic policy.
That's the real foreign policy, and the people know it too. That's why Bush's success in Desert Storm hasn't lasted, because people look not at that, but at the trip to Japan, and they say, here is a president who took the economic might of the United States and his baggage train to Japan and ended up bashing on bended knee. And that was politically intolerable.
David Matthews, what do you think about that?
Well, I think you give the Kennedy speech today, people think you're crazy. You don't have to out-hawk George Bush, because you won't win the election that way anyway.
Why not?
Well, this is why. Because people know what strength is today. And they can see that the Japanese are stronger than us in a lot of ways, and that we're kowtowing to them. Just ask yourself, who's got strength? The bank president or the Irish cop he hires to stand out front and guard the front door? Who's got strength? The Japanese have strength. We become like the Gurkha army. We fight to protect our assets. The checkbook powers, Germany and Japan, pay us to be their Irish cop. And if we want to play that role in the world, we should keep Bush. I think we should be the owners again.
And how do we do that?
Not the guards.
How do we become the owners as Democrats?
Well, I think you have to stop saying that the government is the problem, not the solution. Government is the solution. Throughout American economic history, governments created economic power through the railroads, through the land-grant colleges. It's played a role in building our economic power. And if you make the government impotent, you create us impotent in the world. And what you have to run as a Democrat is run on your strengths, which is you're going to be the strongest country in the world again. Because you're really going to have economic power, because the government's going to go back to a system of mixed capitalism again, where the government, the public, and the private sector work together instead of this mindless Reaganism, which Bush has been heel-clicking to for the last 3 years. George Bush is a Tory. He believes in no positive role for the federal government. He believes that the economic distribution of this country is fine. And you've got to get a new president there to change that.
Okay, let me ask you, Madeleine Albright, what about the idea of the Democrat really defining foreign policy and making it an important issue? Can it be done?
I think absolutely, and this is the best time to do it, because as the others have said, the agenda is different. We won, containment survived, and really put an end to our major enemy, and everything needs to be redefined. I think it was best said by Bill Clinton, who in effect said that George Bush is the last of the Cold War presidents, and what is needed is a new kind of a president who will in effect be able to lead us into a very exciting era. The mistakes that I think are being made is that we're looking at this as if it were going to be some terrible era. The truth is it has all kinds of opportunities. Democrats are very good, I think, in terms of looking at opportunities, and we need to really stress that. The other point I would make is that George Bush actually has weakened American foreign policy, and he's weakened it because he's separated it from the American people. He never talks to the American people about what foreign policy really is. He never explains why we have a stake in it. I think others have said the continuity of domestic and foreign, but he has to explain it, and I think that's where you as a Democratic candidate can talk about why it is important for us to have good trade relations, why it's important for us to deal with the ozone layer, why it is important for us to be able to respond to threats throughout the world, as you said we should on the Gulf War. And therefore, it's important for a Democratic candidate specifically to address himself to the American people, to understand that the roots of American foreign policy are in domestic policy. And I think we would be really performing a very bad service if we allowed you as a candidate not to get involved in foreign policy, because ultimately in the general it will come back. You're going to have to deal with it, and therefore you need to stake your ground out very strongly as somebody who understands the new foreign policy or the new agenda, and that you are willing to have a dialogue with the American people about what we ought to be doing in the world.
Okay, you're listening to Presidential Choices, a hypothetical discussion of presidential politics. Joining me today in Des Moines, Iowa, Congressman David McCurdy, Madeleine Albright, Leslie Gelb, and Chris Matthews. Now, what about the idea of making this a priority in terms of foreign policy? Mr. Gelb, let me ask you this. I just looked at the New York Times 2 days ago. And the New York Times has Senator Kerry's major foreign policy speech on page 8. Not a mention of it on the first page, and only a paragraph referenced then. If you say foreign policy is important, why isn't the press covering it? Why isn't it important?
Well, the press isn't doing much coverage of issues generally. We're covering mostly the soap opera of the campaign, alas, after 4 years of saying we wouldn't do it. But it's
well,
up,
tell me
it's
what
up
I should
to you.
say about
It's
the
up
press.
to you.
What do I need to say to the press to say?
It's up to you
right?
to make this issue compelling. That's your challenge. Fortunately, I'm a newsman, and I don't want a job in your administration. But I tell you what I think you should do. I would push on the issue, and I'd push on 3 fronts. First of all, the defense budget, because that defense budget must be cut. It must be cut deeply over the next 5 years by about 50%. Because it's a different world out there, and almost everybody understands that except the folks in Washington. Go after it.
All right, let me take that first one.
That's also a place where you're going to get some money to fund your domestic program.
Congressman Curdy,
it's the only place.
I've got a challenge, 50% cut in the defense budget. Good idea, right?
Well, Governor, I think if you go do that, you better go learn some economics. With my all due respect,
50% is half. I know that, right?
Let me tell you that, but I'm a member of the Armed Services Committee and actually chair a special panel looking at the health of the defense industrial base. 1/3 of all engineers and scientists in the United States do work for the Pentagon. The Pentagon supports 10% of the manufacturing base in this country. We have in excess of 2 million Americans on active duty. Now, the question is, where do you cut? Are we going to cut the defense budget in order to stimulate the economy in the short term by laying them off, forcing them out so they can go join a new WPA program? What the issue for Democrats is we have to do more than to make America's decline more comfortable. We are in transition. We have to have a policy that lays the groundwork for the new agenda, as Les said, but there is a transitionary period.
But tell me, how much of a cut? Les Gelba says 50%. Okay. What did you say?
The range between the cuts right now, President Bush recommends $64 billion over the next 4.
What percentage would you recommend to me?
Senator Kennedy says 115.
Right.
I think the range is somewhere in there, but I don't think there's. You don't fall into the trap. Now, it may be good politics, but I'll separate the two here a minute. Don't fall in the trap of just saying, here's a magic number of savings. We have to develop a defense budget for the real world in the post-Cold War. That means redesigning it, restructuring it.
Well,
now,
course.
Bush is vulnerable
of course,
for
Dave, we're just not going to say cut idly by 50%. You're going to do it with some plan in mind. But I think it can be
over what period, 50%?
I would say over 5 years, and I think it can be done.
Les, why is Dave so reluctant to cut the defense budget substantially? What's going on?
Well, but he's got a practical reason and a political reason. Practical reason, he told you, it's not so easy to do what I say. You really have to...
It takes courage.
Well, it takes courage. You also have to have a plan. Nobody's really planning on how you do it. No one's planning on how you do it.
I don't think the numbers are important. I think the numbers are less important than the plan. And here I agree with Dave completely. Les Aspin has worked out a whole series of approaches to looking at, it's not just making the Cold War Army smaller, the Cold War forces smaller. You've got to go and really figure out what the threats are. And this is where you've got to talk to the American people to find out what we think is in our vital interest. How much of our resources do we want to commit to defending various places around the world? And I think that's why it can't be done on a strict mathematical basis.
American people can't begin to answer that question.
Yes, they can.
They want a candidate to answer.
The American people. That is the point. You have to have faith.
Yep.
I am convinced that the real mistakes that we make, all of us that are in policy-making positions, is not having enough faith in the American people and explaining and having them explain to us what they want.
Well, I'm going to tell them then.
This is a democracy.
Am I telling them in effect that the Cold War is over? There is no real threat to our democracy, so I'm going to take troops out of Europe, I'm going to slash the defense budget by at least 50%, and I'm going to use some of that for domestic programs. Dave Matthews?
Well, I think you got to look at this as a transition period in American history, as Madeline and Dave McCurdy has mentioned. It's not a question of numbers, it's a question of the trend and the big change in focus. We're going from a war we won to a war we may lose. Now, what the president should have done, Bush, when he gave that clinker of a State of the Union address the other night, was what he should have done, because he didn't have the nerve to do it, but what he should have done is had a big silver dollar, 2 of them, and show where we were spending our money for the last 20 years, $300 billion every year in defense, and all this entitlement money, and say, look, by the year 2000, this country is going to dedicate itself to a new front. The new front's economic. I'm going to take a huge chunk of that and put it into R&D, into business development, into infrastructure. We're going to change that dollar around so that when your kids are growing up, they're going to have a country that's winning their war, not our war. And I think the president did that because he was afraid to talk about defense cuts. He was afraid he's going to offend members of Congress who were worried about district bases at home. He never really said we're going to change the country around. He gave a lip service to it because Peggy Noonan wrote the speech for him. And so she put that in there about the Cold War was over. But his heart's not in the Cold War being over. And that's one of the reasons Senator Kerry went in this race, because you could tell during the Moscow coup in August, Bush was very comfortable with the idea of the apparatchiks taking over again. He liked it, that old kind of stuffy old war with the cartoon Russian we're fighting. He seemed to want to go back to that. And maybe that seems like a deranged statement, or a statement of derangement. But I think there is a real problem here. Every president we've had since World War II was in uniform in World War II. Every single one of them is a son of World War II. They think like World War II. They think Munich. We got to go back and stop the Germans. We got to stop the Japanese. Well, the only similarity between World War II and what we're facing today is oil got us into the war in the Pacific because the Japanese wanted oil, and we said you couldn't have it if they invaded into China. We have to get oil. There are a lot of things we have to get, but you know the Japanese have learned you can get a lot of stuff if you're good at economics. You don't need an army. They're getting to be the richest country in the world without an army. Why don't we get the message?
I'm trying to get the message. Yes.
Because I think I agree with a good deal what Chris just said, but I think a lot of it's just words that roll off the back of the American people. That if you want to really call attention to what you have to say, to define yourself as a candidate, to make foreign policy an issue, you've got to have some meat on what you say. And the meat of a theme is the defense budget. And if you don't take that head on, you've really got nothing but a lot of words.
Okay, let me pursue that a little bit. I wanted to play for you a short part of the President's State of the Union address, because I think what it does, it captures the fact that he has kind of slid from foreign policy to domestic issues, as if I've conquered the world, now I'm going to conquer the economy. And that plays very well. He has said, I'm successful on foreign policy, I'm going to be just as successful with the same plan in terms of our domestic agenda. Let's listen to the President and then see what I can do as a candidate.
There were times when I was so busy managing progress and helping to lead change that I didn't always show the joy that was in my heart. But the biggest thing that has happened in the world, in my life, in our lives, is this. By the grace of God, America won the Cold War. And now we can look homeward even more and move to set right what needs to be set right.
Now, how do I respond to that? Now, he has basically shifted the agenda. Madeline?
Well, I think, first of all, he used a key word in there, that he managed foreign policy. You can't manage a change in domestic policy. I think that what you have to say is just the way he had no vision in looking forward in foreign policy, he has none at all as far as his domestic program is concerned, that he isn't approaching it in the right way. You can't just say, I ended the Cold War, where there's some question as to what his role in it frankly was. But basically, you know, how you move this great country forward. And it is your role, I think, as a candidate to show how the United States, a reborn United States, a stronger United States economically, with our education in better tack, our roads, and all our infrastructure that we need, can in fact be a leader in the world in a different kind of format.
Well, I want to try to use foreign policy lingo that he uses to show his weakness in domestic policy. What if I come out, Chris? Let me ask you this, Chris. The idea. Look at Iraq. Hussein is still in power. Now, what if my campaign slogan would be, Hussein still has a job, do you? Doesn't that make the point?
Well, it sure does. And also, I'd replay Jim Baker, the Secretary of State's comment that the reason we went to that war, which was basically a spice war, the reason we went into the war
is that about
had nothing
oil?
to do with American values. It had to do with oil. And Bush probably got around, the Brady bunch probably got around to admitting it, the economic policy guys that hang around Bush and think like him, and they don't think about us. This crowd basically won that war because they wanted to protect the oil, and now they're going to try to say that they succeeded. Well, the problem is the jobs promise that Baker made. It's not. I don't think people think a whole lot about Saddam Hussein, and I don't think they think a whole lot about Bush winning that war. The greatest slogan in politics is "What you do for me lately," and what's he done for us lately? He hid under his pillow for 6 months during the recession. You know, I hear a noise downstairs. Barbara says, "Oh, I didn't hear anything." You know, that's been going on for 6 months, and now he's like Neville Chamberlain saying, "Now I'm going to get tough. Now I'm going to get tough." You were the guy that wimped out on this thing. You let this thing grow because you're listening to people like Michael Boskin all day. God knows what he told him. God knows what the chairman of the Council of Economics, what Eisner was telling the president. So now he says, I've ignored this war in that apologetic speech of his, but now I'm going to get serious. Why am I going to get serious? Because I got a primary next month.
And
well, yeah, but
Congressman McCurdy?
Chris and I don't always agree on, especially on areas like foreign policy, and I think if you follow his advice, you're going to do what most Democrats have done in the last 3 or 4 presidential elections. You're going to get your tail end kicked. That's simplistic and it's funny, but I tell you, when you go back in there in November and people look at it and seriously evaluate, there's a threshold that a presidential candidate has to pass. Are you a capable and solid and stable world leader as well as a national leader? Bush's foreign policy is a disaster because it was based on personality. And I agree with you. You may have said that Bush was a Tory. Yes, that's why he doesn't understand the economy. He doesn't know what it takes to make it work. He clips coupons. He looks at the stock market as the indices of the health of the U.S. economy, as opposed to understanding how you create wealth. He's had the wealth. He doesn't have to worry how you make it. Japan, which is 2/3 the size of the GNP of the United States, invest 50% more each year in research and development, non-defense, than we do. The question is, as a candidate, what is your plan? Do you agree? And I think you have to say this out front. This is what distinguishes Democrats from Republicans, in my opinion. Do you believe government has a role in the economy, and should it be an active role? I am a free marketer, but I tell you what, I think the government has a role to play. It encourages that investment. You have tax policy that encourages long-term investment, not short-term profit-taking. You have a strategy for this investment and how you create jobs and wealth in the long term. George Bush doesn't understand that. So rather than picking up the cute slogans, be careful. I always think you have to avoid just the short-term measure that sounds good, but in the long term only adds to the national debt and doesn't allow you to make the investment. Buchanan has... Let me tell you about Buchanan. Don't get into a slogan. I've got a classic Buchanan slogan he ought to run. In these dangerous and uncertain times, it calls for dangerous and uncertain leadership.
That sounds like a good one. That's not too bad.
Slogans, Dave. Don't knock slogans, because let's get this country moving again was pretty good in '60. Kennedy didn't win because he was a hawk. That was a very mixed bag in that campaign. Kimoya-Metz, there are lots of issues where he was softer than Nixon. Nixon was soft on other issues, tough on other issues. The key decisive factor in the 1960 presidential election between Nixon and Kennedy was economics. We were coming out of a terrible recession. The unemployment rate was going up. Kennedy wanted to get the country moving again. Nixon was, let's stand pat.
He offered hope. He offered hope and vision. That's what you have to offer.
Well, I'm going to tell you about my hope and vision. I'm going to talk to you about my new foreign policy mission and get your feedback on it. Before I do that, let me identify once again. We're here in Iowa at the Iowa Historical Building listening to Presidential Choices. We're here with Chris Matthews, Leslie Gelb, Madeleine Albright, and Congressman Dave McCurdy. Let me talk about my bold new initiative as a foreign policy initiative. I want to have a foreign policy mission that's not slogans, that's not speeches, that's not sound bites, but that has some substance to it. And this is the first component of it. I think we should have something in the form of a trilateral agreement between Japan, the United States, and the European community to rebuild the Soviet Union, to put substantial amounts of money into the Soviet Union as part of our new approach. Congressman McCurdy, you're rolling your eyes.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think just massive amounts of money is what they need. They had an ideology that failed. They have not made the transition to understanding an economy and understanding where they're moving to. My approach would be to support them with technical advice and assistance, humanitarian aid to get them through the winter and all, but just throwing money into this is not going to solve their problems. I would propose a democracy corps, have a bill on it. Some of the candidates, Bill Clinton and others, have supported that idea as well. Go in and actually find out what their needs are. And then send Americans like we did with the Peace Corps, going back to the Kennedy hope and vision and uplifting message.
But what about the risk? The Democracy Corps, they say, give us money, give us technical advice. We may want to go back to communism if we have the resources. How is that going to work?
But if you don't have a stable political system, there's a chicken and egg concept here. You want to just deal with the economy. We can't afford to just throw all that money in there. What we ought to be doing is working with them so they understand what this culture democracy is all about and how the benefits of that over time. They don't understand that. There's a real tendency, and Yeltsin himself may become one of the biggest authoritarian leaders before it's over. He's the first popularly elected leader in Russia in its 1,000-year history. So what we have to allow them to do and work with them to do is show that democracy will give them benefits in the long term. And we need to do that coupled with humanitarian aid in the short term, but just a Marshall Plan to build it is not going to solve their problem.
Chris Matthews, is the Democracy Corps anything more than a slogan? Does that sound to you like a way to respond to what's happening in the Soviet Union?
Well, I was in the Peace Corps, and we did a lot, and I was teaching business to third worlders, to Africans in Swaziland, and it's very tough work, I can tell you. You got to learn the language, you got to learn the culture. You can't just go in there and print out your latest textbook in their language. It's very complicated. So it's a great challenge. I think we should be part of it at the Peace Corps and the Democracy Corps. There's no doubt that teaching democracy is important. We learned our system from the English, from the French. There was a lot of cross-cultural influence in the late 18th century, early 19th century. A lot of countries got their ideas from other countries. I'll never forget being with a professor from Karl Marx University in Budapest in 1989 in April, sitting with this guy, and he's telling me how they're going to overthrow the communist government, how they're going to make the biggest change in the country's history. And he said, we've got a lot of writers and professors together. And I said, oh my God, writers and professors are going to change this country? He says, no, the meetings have been going great. You wouldn't believe it. And I said, where'd you get all this idea from? He said, we watch Yeltsin on television. We watch him fighting with the Soviet leadership. He said, democracy is contagious. And that's the great thing. We should help spread that contagion. And if we don't do it, people will be looking back at us 50 years from now and say, what, are you crazy? You had this great chance to spread the word and teach the system. I think it'll be tougher to teach free markets, and in a lot of countries, I know this may sound awful, it may not be the solution. Maybe you need a really strong socialist system in some of those, real socialism, social democracy like in Scandinavia, and maybe part of the old Soviet Union. But we can definitely try to teach capitalism, and we can certainly have to teach democracy.
But I think your idea is a very good one because of another reason. I think in addition to the Democracy Corps, and especially what I call technical training in democracy and capitalism, it's important. But you are saying you want a trilateral relationship.
Absolutely.
And I think that's important in the following ways. First of all, those countries, Japan and the economic European community are going in there already, and we are being left out. And I think it would be important to develop some kind of a plan whereby the Europeans, who have the biggest stake in this, would in effect pay more because they are nearby, and Germany got unified as a result of the end of communism. But Japan is already making inroads into Siberia and investing, and we, because our capitalists do not have the support of any government, because as Dave was saying, we kind of believe in laissez-faire so much that we're left out, that it would be very useful if you as a candidate could begin to focus on how our government can be a partner to American businesses in, for instance, looking at their oil fields. Soviet Union was the largest oil producer in the world. We need oil. Why can't we work out a deal where we help to develop their oil fields in exchange for a market price that we can deal with? There are all kinds of things, and by having a trilateral approach, we work out who pays for what, who goes where, and we need to be a part of that.
I'm all in favor of you having Madeline work on just the plan she described, and you ought to be prepared to answer questions just along those lines. But if you were to make this issue a cutting-edge issue in your campaign, you'd cut your own throat.
Why?
Americans aren't interested in any massive aid programs to the Soviet Union. They want to see that you have your head screwed on right about it, that you understand what Madeline is talking about, but they don't want you to jump off the bridge with bucks we don't have. Well, if you let me come back to the point again, because this is all about what you're going to say on foreign policy.
Right.
I think you have a threefold message. That's good politics and good policy. One is pro-democracy, for all the reasons everybody here has been saying.
All right.
And it's consonant with American values. And Americans almost care more about that than power politics. Second, say you were in favor of Desert Storm. People still admire what Bush did there, and they want to know a president of the United States is prepared to use force if our vital interests are really threatened.
Before you get to your third point, Leslie, I obviously supported Desert Storm. Right. I'm a governor, so I don't have the power to implement that policy. But did the president go far enough? I mean, is it an issue that
I tell you what I think privately. I wasn't any smarter than he was. I thought when he called the fighting off that Saddam Hussein would be gone in 2 weeks. If I thought Saddam Hussein would still be around, I would have said go further, whatever that meant. But at the time, I hardly heard anybody else say go further.
What are you saying now? What should I be saying now about that second point before you get to your third point?
Just keep up the pressure on the guy, and I think in time he will go. But don't get us involved in any situation where we're going to have to go back in there with the use of force.
All right, third point. Where's your third point?
Just one comment on that, because I think you have something you need to go with. This is where I differ with Chris some on the issue of Desert Storm. I had to vote on that, and I voted for the use. And I think it was supported by the American public. It wasn't George Bush didn't win Desert Storm. Americans, our technology, our troops, our men and women who put their necks on the line won that. And that's why America rallied. And it was yes, we watched it daily, by the hour. And we had gotten to the position, we are so paranoid in this country. Most people, if you listen to the commentators in the press, you wouldn't think an airplane would even fly. You'd think none of our weapon systems would ever work, and that our people were lazy and couldn't accomplish something. That's nonsense. We invested and we got a return, and we demonstrated it.
But Congressman McCurdy, I think you're missing the point there, though, because you say Americans won Desert Storm, but the president is running on Desert Storm. His State of the Union address focused again and again on his success. Exactly, and it's very effective.
Wartime analogy.
And they say that Democrats are weak, that we can't stand the pressure. We can't do that. How can I say America won? He's going to say I won.
No.
He's identifying candidates now
when you look
who
at defense
weren't
policy,
supportive of going into...
and it's very difficult for candidates on one hand who didn't support it to come out and say he didn't go far enough. So I think that's disingenuous.
Right.
I think what you have to say is there are occasions, there will be instances, because there's still a dangerous world and there are threats to our vital interests, that we may have to use force. And I'm not afraid to make that decision if I believe it is a rational decision at the time. And get beyond that. So you don't have to answer that question. And I don't think you ought to get into some kind of second-hand guessing or armchair quarterbacking of whether or not he went far enough.
But you should use that as a way of dealing with the defense budget. What you need to do is to develop the technology that won us Desert Storm, to have a well-trained military that won us Desert Storm, that worry about the threats of terrorism and nuclear proliferation and regional conflicts, and take the lessons out of Desert Storm to put a spin of your own on how you want to handle the defense budget and how you view America's power in the world to come. Not keep looking backwards, but I think your message has to be one of always looking forward and relating it to the American people. And to get at something Les was saying, my proposal on helping the former Soviet Union is something that has to be portrayed as being good for America. Markets that ultimately, biggest consumer markets in the world, the ability to have more jobs, because the American people, as I said, are not supporting Bush on foreign policy because he never talks about it properly. And your role, because you have a responsibility, you have to think of yourself already as the President of the United States.
All right, that's a good point.
That is a very important part of your image.
One of the things I may think about doing is to actually do some travel. I mean, to go to countries like China and Japan and Europe during this campaign. But I wanted to share something else with you. I found it fascinating to hear Pat Buchanan raise a foreign policy issue that very much tied into our economic concerns today. And I thought he was quite effective. And I'm wondering whether or not he has, in a sense, stolen the thunder from us by focusing on China. We haven't heard much about China. But not too long ago, Pat Buchanan had this to say when he talked about our debt relationship with China.
In the last 3 years, the regime in Beijing, which ran the tanks over the students in Tiananmen Square, got $3.5 billion in loans. Half of it was at zero interest for 40 years. Now, does anyone think that 85-year-old chain-smoking communist dwarf Deng Xiaoping is ever going to pay that money back?
Now, it sounds like, Congressman McCurdy, it sounds like sloganeering, but it's more than that. This touches Americans. Here we are. Giving money to China, and he said, wait a minute, we've got people here who need things.
Well, actually,
Congressman McCurdy?
I hate to ever say I would agree with Pat Buchanan on a foreign policy issue, but I voted...
Are you saying that?
I've actually voted not to extend MFN, Most Favored Nation status, to China because of their human rights record and the fact that Bush, again, basing his foreign policy on personalities, and since he was ambassador, thinks he's the expert, it's a few years and is dated, thinks he can work with these guys. If you listen to Li Peng, when he was in the United States, he was basically telling us where we could put our foreign policy and our status, and yet they still want our money and our treatment. I think the president is very vulnerable on the issue of China, and I think Democrats have a good track record on that, and I would urge you, now if you want to take a trip to China, be careful, because you're not going to be very popular, and you better not be in there toasting these guys.
We don't want the Japan fiasco again, you're saying.
Well, yeah, you don't want to be...
But isn't that a bold stroke to say, unlike our president, I'm going to go to China and say, you've got to deal with human rights concerns. Yeah. I think we should re-examine the foreign most favored nation treatment. We've got to deal with real foreign policy issues.
And you can also be a little more pragmatic. When we're talking about aid and assistance, tie it to U.S. credits. Why not do what the Japanese have done? Rather than just giving foreign aid, they also say, guess what? These credits will buy you Japanese goods. We'll send you our little cars and trucks. Why not tie it to credits for agriculture commodities or U.S. technology? I was angry as an American to be in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, right after the collapse of communism, and realize that we couldn't take advantage of the goodwill established after 45 years of whipping this and defeating this system, that we weren't in a position to help our businesses and our people to go in there with some money and investment to take advantage of that market. It's our debt. This is all wonderful, but if you ignore one salient fact in all this, we are borrowing from our future, and we have mortgaged ourselves after 12 years of Reaganomics and Bushomics, that we are in a position we cannot take advantage of the new world and the new opportunities which we fought and won. And yet, because of their failed policies, we can't go out there and make this investment.